Hello everybody, this is Jack at the paranormalintelligenceagency.com. Thanks for being with us today. First of all, I wanted to thank everybody out there that's watched the first 2 seasons of Ancient Civilizations on Gaia. Thanks to you, we've had 8 million viewers, and the 3rd season will debut December the 21st. So be with us for that. I will be hosting a new radio show called Jack Cary Paranormal Planet, and that will be on the BXP live YouTube station, so tune in for that as well. And today we're going to investigate an ancient mystery that goes back to the American Southwest. And this might be a mystery that some of you have heard of, but you may never have heard all of the details and evidence put together the way that I have. One of the greatest natural wonders of the world cuts deep into the heart of the Arizona desert, the Grand Canyon. Beautiful and breathtaking, this vast cleft in the earth holds many secrets, and perhaps none are more mysterious than the one reported in the Phoenix Gazette on April 5th of 1909. An explorer, a man named G.E. Kincaid, who had served with the Smithsonian for over 30 years, was reporting a startling archaeological discovery. Kincaid's boss, Professor S.A. Jordan of the Smithsonian, who was financing the expedition, was said to be enthusiastic that the find be further investigated as it was of a major significance. Kincaid had found that about 2,000 feet up the canyon wall above the Colorado River, some 42 miles upstream from the El Tovar Crystal Canyon, a cave entrance to a vast underground city chiseled from the solid rock. There were steps up to the cave, suggesting that the river level had been that high when the inhabitants had lived there. This would mean at least 3,000 years had passed since then. This citadel was almost a mile underground and was very precisely carved in geometric patterns over an enormous area. Kincaid reported that several hundred rooms had been discovered, but that the full extent of the city was still impossible to estimate. And perhaps the most startling find was the Great Hall, about 100 feet in from the cave entrance. This contained a carved idol, presumably of the god these people worshipped, which he described as, "The idol sits cross-legged with lotus flower or lily in each hand. The cast of the face is oriental, and the carving shows a skillful hand. Being remarkably well preserved, it resembles Buddha, and though scientists are unsure of its religious import, it reminds them strongly of the ancient people of Tibet." Many smaller, beautifully carved images were reported, and as was the finding of all kinds of copper tools preserved by many, some sort of hardening method, which their scientists could not copy. Artistic vases and urns of copper and gold, as well as enameled ware and glazed vessels were found, and even granaries like those found in Oriental temples still holding seeds. There was a gray metal found resembling platinum, which scientists could not identify, and yellow stones known as cat's eyes were everywhere, each one engraved with a Malay-type head. Even more significant was the finding of hieroglyphics, amazingly similar to those found in Egypt, engraved on urns, on tablets, and around doorways. Deciphering these, of course, would be a major step towards solving the mystery, but as you'll see, we don't know if that ever happened. A large crypt was found, with mummies in it, reportedly well preserved. They were all male. They were entombed with weapons, suggesting that this was a burial site for soldiers, though varying degrees of development in the ceramics found with them hint that this was a civilization that was constantly refining itself. It was thought that up to 50,000 people could have lived in the city. Strangely enough, the tradition among the Hopi Indians tells of an ancestry that harks back to their people having once lived in an underworld in the Grand Canyon, until rivalry broke out between two factions. The good faction, the people of one heart, were led to the outside world by their chief, Machado, while the people of two hearts remained behind. Today, visitors from the south rim of the Grand Canyon can see the structure called the Isis Temple, a pyramid hewn from solid rock of the cliff top and obviously man-made. There is an account by two backpackers of an exploration of this edifice. They tell of finding cave entrances that had been deliberately sealed, though they did seem man-made, one having a clear 6-foot circular pattern carved into the roof. This site is over 40 miles from the one reported in the newspaper article. Yet, why would caves that are almost inaccessible need to be sealed up? And was the originally stated location simply a mistake, or was the account of these backpackers showing us that this settlement was bigger? When we look to possible suspects in regards to the people who must have carved the temple complex described in the 1909 Arizona Gazette article, it leads us down some interesting avenues. One of those suspects is the Anasazi, whose name translates into the Ancient Ones, or Ancient Enemies. They were an extremely mysterious people spread all across the Southwest and were responsible for many strange stone structures that litter the landscape and baffle authorities even today. Modern scholars believe that these people were just another Native American tribe who simply assimilated into so-called Puebloans, and that this explanation for their disappearance is a valid one. However, Navajo, Paiute, Hopi oral traditions universally agree that the region was inhabited by a genetic and culturally distinct, vicious, and cannibalistic people prior to their arrival, and that these ancient enemies were eventually driven away or into extinction. Although some degree of assimilation most likely did occur. While on the aforementioned sites are worth researching in relation to this mystery, perhaps the two most intriguing are Stanton's Cave and Mummy Cave. Stanton's Cave is located close to the South Canyon camping beach. It's not within the forbidden zone. This cave was originally believed by the authorities to be man-made and is currently sealed with metal bars to prevent entry. According to the sign, this is for people's safety and to protect an endangered bat habitat. The ceiling of the cavity is clearly vaulted, and it does not resemble a natural feature. It is also known that this cavity was inhabited in the distant past, and many precious artifacts were removed during an official excavation in 1969 and 1970. Mummy Cave, located at Canyon de Chelly National Monument, and not to be confused with Mummy Cave site in Wyoming, is a few hours northeast by car of the Grand Canyon. Bizarre, mesmerizing ancient ruin is massive and very strange. Among the discoveries, there were no bones of animals, no skins, no clothing, no bedding. Many of the rooms were bare but for water vessels. One room, about 40 by 700 feet, was probably the main dining hall, for cooking utensils were found there. What these people lived on is a problem, though it is presumed that they came south in the winter and farmed in the valleys, going back north in the summer. Upwards of 50,000 people could have lived in the caverns comfortably. One theory is that the present Indian tribes found in Arizona are descendants of the serfs or slaves, the people which inhabited the cave. Undoubtedly, a good many thousand years before the Christian era, people lived here which reached a high stage of civilization. End quote from the 1909 article. This theory meshes well with the Native American traditions that characterize the Anasazi as ancient enemies, and there is indisputable evidence that these people inhabited the region long before the present tribes that were there, and were the progenitor of very sinister events. For example, while no animal bones or skins were found, what were found were human remains. Remains by themselves are not surprising, but the manner in which they were discovered is quite ominous. A stone's throw from Mummy Cave lies Big Cave, which is the subsection of Canyon de Chelly known as Canyon del Muerto, the Canyon of the Dead. The remains of 14 infants were found in a slab-lined cist used earlier as a storage bin. Below the infants were the bodies of 4 other children packed in an enormous blanket. It's interesting because they found these mummified bodies, and it's very reminiscent of the Egyptian culture. Investigators have made inquiries to the Smithsonian regarding the names in the 1909 Arizona Gazette article discussing this discovery. The Smithsonian in the year 2000 denied ever knowing anything about this discovery or the 2 gentlemen that are mentioned in the article. However, it can be proven that Professor Jordan was indeed closely affiliated with the Smithsonian Institution for 30 years, spanning from the 1880s up until about 1910. And he conducted ichthyological expeditions on the Colorado River and into the Grand Canyon. And according to early census records, Starr was not his given middle name, and it did not become legal until later in the life when he selected it. Jordan served as president of Stanford University and was a fervent believer in eugenics. Jordan's primitive pseudoscience and xenophobic paranoia lead him to write the 1899 essay, A Study of the Decay of Races Through the Survival of the Unfit, in which he illustrated his irrationality regarding race degeneration and implored the effectuation of tremendous efforts designed to maintain racial unity. Later on, it was Jordan who led a nationwide sterilization program, which was clearly a crime against humanity. In 2003, many buildings in California were shamefully stripped of his name, and the California legislature unanimously expressed its profound regret over the state's past role in the eugenics movement. In light of all of this, it's not surprising that the Smithsonian would have commissioned him in the past to distort the historical record, and now they seek to distance themselves from him. And here is where we find the motive for the cover-up of this find. It was discovered by a man who believed that any other race that would have settled in North America must be covered up because it was the white man's right to rule North America. And so what you have here is somebody who was used by the Smithsonian because of his views to control the historical narrative of westward expansion and the idea of manifest destiny, which many people will know about from school. So herein lies exactly where the cover-up began, and it was and is the motive for the continuing cover-up. Now, many historical skeptics out there will tell you that there was no transatlantic trade taking place before Columbus's time. And many of these people are completely unaware of a documentary that has been titled The Curse of the Cocaine Mummies. This documentary is on the findings of routine tests on a mummy in a Munich museum which showed high levels of nicotine and cocaine. The findings were criticized because such substances come from the Americas and were apparently not discovered until thousands of years after the passing of the Egyptian dynasties. The film questions whether the mummies are fake or whether there were, in fact, trade routes between Egypt and the Americas that predate accepted chronology. In the beginning of the 90s, the Egyptian Museum in Munich initiated a research project to find out whether the ancient Egyptians had consumed the lotus flower because of its psychedelic properties, a theory triggered by many decorative lotus flowers in many temples. Dr. Svetla Balabanova, a renowned toxicologist of the Forensic Medicine Institute in Ulm, Germany, examined 9 mummies on request of a museum and found that instead of lotus flower remains, an abundance of nicotine and cocaine was present. Such drugs come from the tobacco and cocoa plants, respectively, plants that existed only in the Americas and were unknown before Columbus discovered America. To be sure, she requested that 3 other laboratories repeated the test, and all came up with the same result. Even though these techniques are used in criminal lawsuits the world over are 100% accurate, the scientific world, headed by the Oxford University, reacted furiously and denied the outcome, since it implicates that there was contact between Egypt and the Americas before Columbus, which is regarded by science as absolutely impossible. However, nicotine had previously been discovered and mummified remains in 1976 when the mummy of the pharaoh Ramses II was brought to the Museum of Mankind in Paris, but this was conveniently forgotten as it is seen as unfavorable by Egyptologists. And that's it for today, guys. So it is a fascinating mystery, and one I will continue to investigate. But be sure to join us on the 3rd season, Ancient Civilizations, December 21st, and coming up here, December 9th, you can join me on Jack Cary's Paranormal Planet on the BXP YouTube station. Until then, guys, be good, and I'll be investigating.